Hey, everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam de Boer. Liam, what are we talking about today?
Today, we are going to be talking about Trudeau's pandemic-style spending plan, a fool's response to Trump's tariffs, the Hoax foreign interference report citing that no traitors are in Parliament and recommends an online censorship agency, Canada's $17.9 billion red tape crisis, Poilievre calling to deport temporary residents involved in violence or hate crimes, Alberta task force slamming the COVID-19 response, urging vaccine halt and system overhaul, as well as the ivory tower falling with fraud, politics, and the death of academic integrity. All right, let's get started. So, first off, we've got Trudeau's pandemic-style spending plan, a fool's response to Trump's tariffs. The Trudeau government is preparing to respond to Trump's proposed 25% tariffs with pandemic-style bailouts, repeating the same reckless spending that fueled Canada's inflation crisis. Despite Milton Friedman's warning that inflation is always a monetary phenomenon, Trudeau's Liberals plan to print and borrow more, ignoring even former Finance Minister Bill Morneau's admission of past overspending. Hayek's Road to Serfdom warns against government intervention leading to economic dependence, yet Ontario Premier Doug Ford is pushing for massive stimulus. Real solutions like deregulation, fiscal discipline, and leadership change are ignored as Trudeau's government doubles down on failed policies, ensuring greater dependence on state control. So, can Canada survive another round of pandemic-style spending?
Not and maintain the same level of capitalism or democracy. Here's the problem. Anytime you look at pandemic spending, or anytime you look at printing money like this, you go, what are the knock-on effects, right? So we saw inflation spike. We saw interest rates spike. We saw bankruptcies go through the roof. Tons of people lost businesses. I shut down some. The other issue you have too. So when you just think about how this works with growth of GDP, I think is a good comparison to make. So this is Poilievre. He put this out. That Trudeau printed $700 billion in the last 3 or 4 years. So when you look at that in comparison to the growth of our GDP, it outpaced our GDP by 10x, which creates massive inflation, which is why we've had these problems, why we've had this housing issue. And now look where our dollar is. We're dangerously close to being like to hitting records. I think it was in the early 2000s. It got to like right now I think it's 144. I think it got to 161 when you flip it the other way and look at US. And now they're talking about it getting back to that same number after they implement these tariffs. So if our response is to do something that we know drives inflation and weakens our dollar and creates massive raises in interest rates and all these other issues that you've had in bankruptcies and such, it's one of these things where it's like, hey, here's a good short-term solution, and we're all going to pay dearly for it down the road. So I can't see this being a good idea. If we get into something like this, like you have to consider what this looks like for Canadians in 2 years from now, 3 years from now, right? And they were already flirting with the idea of universal basic income. We already know that's the worst idea in the world because there's no way to fund it, right? It's a nice idea, but like, hey, everybody's got some money, everybody can live, but it comes out of taxpayer dollars. And their idea for funding it was just full fucking nonsense. They had no idea. Basically, they just said they were going to make it up. We're just going to collect more from here and here and all these other places we're not currently collecting from. I'm like, well, if you could collect it, then you would be collecting it. And they severely underestimated how much it would cost as well. So my concern is you get into this issue again. You have a massive spike in interest. You have a massive spike in inflation, a big spike in the cost of living. Wages don't keep up with it again. And then what does this look like for round two? Because the only thing you can do after that is print more money. And then you have to start giving it away like UBI. Then what happens? Then you're stuck in this hamster wheel of, we're not really in democracy anymore. We are in this road to serfdom situation where there's really nothing to do but depend on the government. So this could be quite severe.
Yeah, you instantly find yourself in a very similar situation to somebody like Argentina, who, Javier Milei has had to come in and clean up that mess. But for decades upon decades, that's the death spiral they were in which led to a 40% poverty rate in Argentina. Because yes, to your point, I think the most important thing to note throughout all of that is prices. This is like economics 101. So the politicians and their advisors know this. I mean, I would hope. It's really scary if they don't. But price is determined by demand and supply, the relationship between the two. And if you flood the economy with just more money, essentially more demand, without increasing the supply, which would be productivity of your businesses, then yes, all that's going to happen is prices skyrocket. And now we're seeing with, Kingston just declared a state of emergency last week with 1 in 3 residents having struggling to put food on the table. 50% of Canadians report feeling financially paralyzed and dipping into retirement or into emergency funds. And so all of this is just going to throw more and more fuel on that fire. And it's so insane to me that none of these leaders are just looking at the proper response, which is to stop the illegal migration.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two big things we should be doing. 3, really. 1, Trump wants you to fight with him. He likes it. He's an inflammatory guy. Like, hate it or love it, whatever you want. He will get into it with people. That's kind of his shtick. So giving him what he wants is not going to work out well for you. 2, yes, the borders. Yes, the drug trade. Yes, the immigration. Sure, it's a two-way problem, but he's got a bigger stick. So toe the line. 3, leverage your natural resources. You have to do it. That's your long-term solution. So they say, hey, let's print more money. No, go leverage your fucking natural resources. That's the actual solution we need. So this is a stupid liberal solution. If you listen to Poilievre right now, he's saying, no, we got to leverage our natural resources and start diversifying who we're exporting to. That is an actual long-term solution that's good for the country. This is nonsense.
It is a good long-term solution and it's something we should have been doing for the last decade or two, is diversifying our trade partners and who we give our natural resources to, for sure. But again, that's a long-term solution. To start doing that, like, the effects of the Trump tariffs are going to have major impacts on day one as soon as they're starting to be implemented. And so I don't think you can really take a plan that will take a year or two, a minimum, to start executing, which is to, yes, build pipelines and start exporting to other countries. Hell, it would probably even take more than a year or two to build that infrastructure, especially when you consider Canada's productivity rate, which is falling through the floor. And this goes back to that conversation we had in a prior episode where I just go, we're not in a position to fight. And by not admitting that to ourselves, we're just doing a whole bunch of harm. Because I would love it if for the last, couple decades, we had great governance and, we were in that position. Hell, even actually during the Harper days, our dollar was very similar. Our GDP per capita was neck and neck. Our economy was overall, like, in proportion to America, about the same when it comes to things like per capita GDP and such. But since then, it's just fallen off the map since Trudeau got into office.
So when it comes to our oil and gas, we could start exporting significantly more within months.
Yeah.
Oil and LNG, significantly more. So this, I'm looking into it right now as soon as you said that, because that's a good point to make. Like, what does this look like? So you're correct in that, like, hey, if you're looking at expanding pipelines and infrastructure for LNG, you're looking at a 5-year runway. But within a few months to as long as 2 years, but it goes sequentially. Within months would be oil and gas. We could increase significantly. Metals and critical minerals like nickel, lithium, copper, cobalt. We could expand production significantly within 12 months. And then agriculture and forestry, it says again, under a year. So there is options. It's just a matter of where it's going, I think, right? So yes, I agree with you. That's a better long-term solution. And it's an easy one to pick today because it is the only really good option we have for Canadians. However, when you look at the option for, when you look at their decision to go with pandemic-style spending as a short-term solution, we already know it doesn't work. It kind of goes back to this thing, like with lockdowns for me. If something's dangerous enough, people stay inside. They just will. They're good. If you got a 1 in 5 chance of dying, you're not going out. This thing was ridiculous. There's no reason to lock us down. Should have let us try to fight our way through it. And you may have to loosen some restrictions in terms of individual exports, or maybe cutting this tax or that tax, or find some way to stop taking as much out of business owners' pockets. But don't print money and don't give them money. Don't go that route. Look, anytime something like this happens in the economy, you have to take your emotion out of it and you have to let it sort itself out. Because capitalism does work when you just let it do its thing. Yes, people are going to suffer. Yes, businesses are going to shut down. Yes. But I'm willing to bet if you print another $500 to $700 billion as a solution, it's going to be 10 times worse in 2 years than if you just let it take its own effect right now on its own.
Right,
So
because
don't-
you're just postponing it because
but you're making it a lot worse because the knock-on effects to the macro economy.
like even just look at what happened throughout the pandemic spending, right? They say, okay, we're going to give this stimulus, but especially in the case of businesses, that came in the form of loans. So they loan this money to businesses.
Yes.
And then throughout that process, like let's say that these tariffs last for 6 months, which would be devastating.
Sure.
But okay, so we give you the stimulus for this loan, but then 6 months from now, our economy is even worse than it is today, meaning those businesses aren't making as much as they are prior to the tariffs in order to pay back that loan. And that's exactly what happened with the pandemic. And then all of the businesses were like, oh, like for instance, restaurants. We both know it.
Bankruptcies through the
It's like-
roof.
Exactly. You're like, oh shit, now I have to pay back this loan that was just keeping my doors open. I wasn't
Yes.
really making a profit, or hell, I was even having to find more capital outside of these loans to sink into it. And then once my doors reopen, I'm not even making enough business because, again, the cost of living is so high that people can't afford to go out and eat as much. And
Yeah.
so the domino effects here are just endless.
Okay, so I just kind of came to a bit of a realization here in thinking, like, first of all, the liberal strategy is always spend. Give us more control. We're going to fix everything while they fuck it all up. That's their game plan. That's how it works. So I'm thinking, like, you and I both know how this is going to play out. I think everybody listening's already on the same page if they weren't prior to our discussion. So why would the liberals do this? Well, like I said, they would rather have businesses do well in the next 6 months and 8 months or 10 months prior to an election than let them fail. Because even if 10% of the businesses that are going to fail if you print this much money fail today, well, now the liberals have egg on their face for the 25% tariff. So now it's their fault that the tariff happened. It's their fault that the business is shut down. So what they're going to do is blow more hot air into this, pump more money into this, try to rebuild their brand equity, and then dump this problem on Pierre Poilievre when he gets in 8 to 10 months, whatever it is. 10
Right.
months.
One thing that Poilievre said in that Peterson interview was that, the liberals get the party, I get the hangover.
Yeah, love
And
that.
this is essentially what they're doing is they're just staying up a
Yes.
little later, having a few more drinks before they hand it off.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is pure insanity. But I think also one of the other aspects when it comes to them in their strategy is right now, they just want to hold on to power as long as possible. You're
Correct.
seeing it with the prorogation and all of this kind of stuff. So look at, okay, if we go into a dollar for dollar tariff war, we can declare a state of economic emergency and shut down, say, Parliament again. And I was just talking to you about this other day. When you actually factor in how long Parliament's been closed, because at the beginning of October, Parliament was frozen because the Liberals wouldn't hand over documents for the Green Slush Fund.
For embezzling $300 million.
Yes. And then Christmas happened, which closes it for a month. And
Good
then now
times.
we're into prorogation. And so like by the time March 24th comes around and the prorogation is lifted, as long as, say a lawsuit didn't save us all or something, it's going to be like 6 months.
Yeah, that's wild.
6 months.
What a mess.
But okay, as soon as prorogation is over, we're in economic crisis, guys. We have to freeze parliaments and do emergency measures and just stave off an election again.
yeah, that's interesting. I wonder, because you kind of had this thought in a previous podcast that perhaps Trump rather was trying to push the liberals out by using these tariffs as a weapon. And that's not unreasonable. I think it would be, fourth or fifth down the list for reasons why he's doing it. But
Right.
that definitely could be the reason. So if they get themselves into a situation where they declare an economic emergency, if I were him, I'd just pull the tariffs. Like, oh, there's no emergency. Yank.
Yeah.
We're good. Get back to business. Get the fuck out. So, I mean, it would be interesting because if they do that, he would have the power to flip that switch.
Right.
And we know he hates the liberals. So even though it could go down that path, I would say we have a safety net in Trump knowing how much he hates Trudeau and what the liberals have done to this country. So we'll see how it goes.
Did you see Chrystia Freeland's plan to protect the Canadian economy from Donald Trump?
I don't listen to anything she says. I can't handle it.
One of the
Wow.
the second point, and this just shows you how delusional she is, and just most anybody within this administration and party, because they're all the same. Second point of her plan is immediately convene a summit and form an international coalition with Mexico, Denmark, Panama, and the EU. So she thinks she's going to be able to say, hey guys, all these big powers around the world, you're going to come in, we're going to work together against America. It's like, do you really think any of those people would take Canada's side over America?
What an idiot.
Yeah.
See, here, okay.
That's a
I just- I'm
legitimately
like,
delusional idea.
Yeah, it's just, so as soon as she started backpedaling, on all the policies she implemented, I was like, oh, this is going to be wild, because everybody's trying to run from the policies that were implemented while Trudeau was in power, but she's the one that did them. Now, I think it's the wrong idea to say if someone flip-flops on an idea that they're a bad politician, because what else would you do if you got new information? If I give you new information on something and it changed your mind, that's a positive thing. I can appreciate that. But here's the thing. She's not getting any new information. She's just saying, I was a foot soldier. I did exactly what I had to do. Now I've got new ideas. I have no trust in you whatsoever. You've got no integrity. It's not like you got new information. Now you're like, well, actually, now I feel differently about this. I think this would be better for Canada. You're just like, nope, I did my job. I didn't push back. I was not here for the people. I was here for myself and this party. That's what that says to me. So as soon as she started doing those things, I'm like, get fucked.
Yeah. And I can understand for sure. And I would appreciate if politicians pivoted quicker rather than just deny that their policies have bad effects and then continue to implement them just to save their reputation. But got to consider, especially in the case of somebody like Freeland, and I know you're probably on board with this, but that pivot has to come at a right time. Like, you can't gaslight Canadians about the carbon tax for 5 years from 2019 to 2024 and say, oh, it's so beneficial to all of you and blah, blah, blah. This is how much money you're making. If you question this, you're a climate change denier, whatever. Any
you're
of these
racist.
things.
It's definitely, you're definitely racist if you don't think
and
paying more taxes.
And so you
makes
can't
sense.
gaslight them and go on the offensive against anyone who questions those policies. And then when it's politically convenient, change your mind. It's like you have to. A good example would have been lockdowns. It's like I was. And I know you were on board at the beginning too. It was
first
like,
lockdown
for
only 2 weeks. The first 2 weeks.
When
I
we
was
thought,
like, let's see what's up here.
And then after about a month, we started having data from around the world and stuff. And you could put things side by side to say a place like Sweden and go, hey guys, this isn't making sense. Why does Sweden have similar numbers to us despite not locking down at all?
Yeah.
Are we sure this is a good idea? And then the further you just went into that rabbit hole, the worse it got.
100%.
But
no, I agree. I agree with you. Look, I think the challenge you have is, are people operating from a position of decency and sincerity? I think that is the issue I have with her more than anything. If you're operating from a position of honesty on an issue and you feel one way and you've rationalized it and you think this makes sense, and this goes not for politicians, this goes for everybody, and that's the position that you're in, and now you change your mind, I'm 100% there for you. In fact, you and I spend a lot of our time trying to convince people to see things in a more holistic way, right? So this is so I expect people around us to change their minds all the time. You know what I mean? And we debate and do these kinds of things. But when the thing is, when you do it from the position that she's done it in, like you said, gaslighting, lying, never really supporting these things anyway, just doing it for yourself and this party, it's different when you switch sides.
Right.
It comes with a lot of baggage. Like, yes, I can appreciate that you see it another way, but I just can't support you because I have no trust in you.
Mm-hmm. Last thing I wanted to touch on this topic as well is Peterson did a whole article with the National Post about Canada and America's relations. And one thing that he points out is Canada has spent decades undermining its relationship with the US under the illusion of moral superiority. He claims that Canadian elites look down on middle America while free riding on US military protection. The country refuses to meet even basic NATO spending commitments while sneering at warmongering Americans. At home, Ottawa throttles Alberta's economy while funneling wealth into socialist welfare states like Quebec. And now that Trump's tariffs loom and Alberta, rich in resources but shackled by Eastern bureaucrats, is left vulnerable. If forced to choose between Canada's self-destructive green policies and Trump's offer of energy independence, lower taxes, and access to U.S. markets, would Albertans really say no? And this just raises a really good question is, obviously with Canada being the 51st state or whatever, all of this kind of thing that Trump has been pushing, you do look at it because Danielle Smith has been catching a lot of flack for not wanting to enter into a tariff war with Trump. In people saying that she's not Canada first, but you just look at this and it's like, okay, Alberta, they're using Alberta and their oil as a weapon, essentially,
except it'll ruin the entire economy,
which will hurt Alberta in the meantime. So it's like, hey, we're going to send you. It would be like in war, and let's say you have all these provinces, and those are different military groups, and you're like, all right, Alberta, you're the strongest. You're going to the front lines right now. Go get slaughtered.
Yes,
it's like that's essentially what they're doing to Alberta. And when you put that on the back of what he was talking about with Quebec is the equalization payments. So Canada has a system where they want the public services like healthcare to be equal across all of Canada. So they don't want poorer provinces to have worse healthcare than, say, Ontario or Alberta, right? So they equalize those payments. Well, every year, Alberta gets almost nothing, if not nothing, in equalization payments. And so you look at it and you go, Alberta is subsidizing other provinces, and now you're also sacrificing their economy and telling them that they're not pro-Canada enough.
Yeah, I mean, she's got a few more people on board now. I think there's 2 or 3 premiers that are on kind of the same page. I did find it interesting, though, that Ford is kind of going on the offensive here. But I'm of the mind he's only doing it as a political stunt because he just pulled a snap election.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got an election happening at the end of February because he says he needs a new mandate to manage Trump's tariffs. But the thing is, I actually still think he's the best option for Ontario because you have a lot of bad options right now. We just do. Bonnie Crombie's not ready, and the Liberals shouldn't be running this province. God, I hope not the NDP. Jesus Christ. So it's unfortunate, but he's the best option. He should have a minority because he should have to be answering for the things he's doing right now. Because if you look along the list of shit that he's fucked up, it's in the tens of billions of dollars. Like this alcohol thing. I know we're just kind of rambling on this topic, but transitioning alcohol to convenience stores and out of beer stores and to grocery stores earlier, it just cost $621 million. That's not a good move. He did it as a political stunt, and that's how much it cost us. Not a good play.
I was going to laugh about it. It's hilarious that the best option for Ontario is a guy who sees the world solely through alcohol policy.
Yeah, a buck of beer. That was this whole thing. So anyway, but also like the Greenbelt corruption. Like, it was just obvious. It was just like I feel like he suffered from the Dunning-Kruger effect here. Like, he knows so little, he doesn't know that he doesn't know anything. And he thinks everyone else is on the same level. So he does stuff that is blatant corruption. There's so many better ways to steal. I just couldn't believe it. So I'm of the mind he's really just taking this offensive stance because he thinks it's going to resonate with voters and he thinks it's going to give him a majority government again. So I think he's kind of a unique case. But anyway, more premiers are jumping on board because they're realizing exactly what you just said. You need Alberta. They're the strongest part of the Canadian economy. They shouldn't be weaponized this way. We shouldn't get into this. We shouldn't get into a trade war the way that the federal government is suggesting we do right now with the United States, especially with this whole, let's form another coalition and go at the states. Like, that's insane. So hopefully she still hopefully she still continues to pick up momentum because she's got her head on straight.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Hoax Foreign Interference Report. No traitors in Parliament, it says, and recommends online censorship agency. So the Foreign Interference Commission's report, led by Marie-Josée Hogue, dismisses claims that MPs actively conspired against Canada but acknowledges foreign influence attempts. While intelligence suggests some MPs were semi-witting participants, Hogue downplays concerns and shifts focus to misinformation as the main threat. She recommends expanding government control over online speech, including new election laws and increased collaboration with social media. Critics warn this could justify censorship. The report names China as the primary actor, but claims interference hasn't altered election outcomes or federal laws. Its contradictions raise concerns that the real goal is expanding government power rather than protecting democracy. So, do you think Hogue's reporting was honest about foreign interference in Canada?
I don't want to completely claim that the entire public inquiry on foreign interference that was mostly held in private was a complete sham. But there's a couple things that happened here, right? So, first of all, they were saying that they didn't actually submit all the information. Like 80% of it was still under lock and key. What's the word I'm looking for?
Classified.
Sure, classified's a much better word. So they were saying that 80% of it was still classified. Okay, so did she get all the information? Hard to say. I don't really know. But we do know that Trudeau lied not once, but twice under oath. The one time he said Jordan Peterson was a Russian propagandist, which is wild. The second thing he said was that he had information from within that the Conservative MPs were, in fact, compromised. So if he knows this, then either the report is lying or he is lying. You had mentioned that you'd wager both. I would too. So I think that, you see stuff like that and it doesn't immediately make you question the process and what's happening. I'm taking her out of it for now because I'm saying, okay, did she not get all the information? But it obviously means that Canadians didn't get all the information, right? So that's part of the reality we're in. But here's where it gets bad for me. I I really think that because she's leaning towards this existential threat of misinformation and disinformation, I think it's pretty clear that she's bought and paid for by the Liberals. That's what I think. Because if you believe that you need to implement a federally enforced censorship tool to stop misinformation and disinformation online as a solution to a problem that you say isn't even that bad, well, now I have some questions. Why would you need that? It either is bad and you need these tools, or it's not bad and you don't. You can't have one. You can't have one from each pile. That doesn't make any sense to me. And then she went on to say another thing about diversity, which was fucking insane. I honestly, dude, like I just couldn't believe it. So she called for intelligence agencies to diversify within their personnel and their hiring. So she wants people that have relevant cultural and linguistic backgrounds to now work in our intelligence groups. The ones that she said were lying, by the way. So she wants to increase diversity within the very agencies responsible for stopping foreign interference by hiring more people from the same countries or cultures we're accusing of meddling in our elections. So no, I don't trust this woman, not even a little bit.
Yeah, so there's a group called Friends of Hong Kong, which is a pro-democracy advocacy group, obviously focused on Hong Kong and Chinese affairs. But they've condemned Commissioner Marie-Josée Hoag's final report on foreign interference, citing her ties to liberal-affiliated legal networks as a major concern. The group argues that Hoag's past work at a Quebec law firm linked to Pierre Trudeau and Jean Chrétien raises doubts about her impartiality, fearing the inquiry was designed to shield the Liberal government. They accuse her of downplaying Chinese interference, ignoring long-standing influence networks, and failing to recommend meaningful reforms. Uyghur Canadian leaders and Democracy Watch echoed these concerns, calling the report a cover-up that leaves Canada vulnerable to foreign manipulation. I have no idea how you can say that China is not influencing our politics when you've got guys like Stephen Guilbeault sitting on a Chinese-led environmental organization. And I went through their leadership of this organization, and I counted 21 CCP members before I gave up. And that's on their board of directors and such, all at the highest levels. How are you going to sit here and honestly tell me that China is not influencing our politics when you've got these people sitting on groups like this? And so one thing that she said is the whole report was she was trying to get away from the idea that they were wittingly involved in foreign interference.
Right, even though CSIS said they were.
Right. And so where my mind goes with that is she was essentially saying that, well, these people aren't actively trying to destroy Canada. They're just useful idiots for foreign influence. That's what she was saying, because she even said in that report that there was unethical relationships or something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. But she was saying that there's definitely relationships between them and foreign diplomats that do raise questions. But hey, they weren't wittingly doing it. And it's like, well, I have a problem if our leaders are too dumb to even realize they're being used by a foreign country. And I think that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there was just so many contradictory things between the first and the second report. And there's just too much that, like, how do you know that China, India, Russia, and Iran are all actively trying to interfere in our elections? CSIS is saying that there's MPs that were doing it while wittingly doing it. How can these things be true? And then she also says, well, some ridings were compromised. So how can some seats, I think we said this last time, how can some seats be compromised? And then you tell me that you don't even have all the information, but you know people have been fucking around. How can you tell me that for sure the elections were, our democracy is still strong? You can't. You're full of shit. And the thing is, look, when this happened, she was appointed by Trudeau. So from day one, I didn't realize she was connected to those law firms with Chrystia and Trudeau Sr. I was already like, this is not going to be impartial. It should be in public. It's going to be in private. We should get all the information. We're not getting it. This is 100% bullshit. This is performative at best. They're trying to pull the wool over our eyes, and I don't think we're going to get the real story. So it's unfortunate, but this is just what you get when the Liberal government runs your country for 10 years.
All right, moving on to our next topic. We've got Canada's $17.9 billion red tape crisis, a threat to small businesses and productivity. Red tape is strangling Canadian businesses, costing $17.9 billion annually and consuming 256 hours per small business in 2024. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business reports compliance costs have surged to $51.5 billion, with excessive regulations making up 35%. Small businesses bear the brunt, spending 7 times more per employee than larger firms. Eliminating red tape could free up to 268 million worker hours, equal to 137,000 full-time jobs. With Canada's productivity lagging behind OECD nations, CFIB urges reform. Meanwhile, as the US moves towards deregulation, Canada risks further economic decline without immediate action to ease the regulatory burden. So, is Canada on the path to economic serfdom?
I don't know why anybody would even start a business in this country right now. It's insane what they're doing. Yeah, I mean, look, you think about 137,000 full-time jobs and you wonder why our productivity continues to slide downhill.
Right.
And they're doing this. What's so interesting, and I'm not interesting in a good way, is that they continue to bolster the public service. It continues to climb, up 42% since Trudeau got in. That's direct federal workforce. But anyway, like 26, 27, 28% of Canadians now are working for some form of government agency or arm of or Crown Corp or something like that. So you're continuing to bolster this side, and the only way to justify these jobs is to waste more time in the private sector.
Right.
This is absolutely mental. The whole country just needs to slap the government in the face. I'm a little frustrated to say with this. Like, it's just, we need less government. We need more libertarian policies. We need to deregulate. We need to drop a lot of this stuff. We need to cut costs. We need to kill immigration right now until we can catch up on our infrastructure. We need to leverage our natural resources. We need to give people the opportunity to thrive in this economy. None of the things the government is doing are going to help any of that. They're making it all worse and therefore making the country worse for literally everybody. This is just going to continue to drive the cost of living. It's going to continue to make it harder to get a job. It's just, it's so bananas what they're doing here. It's just so bananas. It's interesting that they were actually able to parse this out and put a dollar value and an hour sort of perspective on it. It's very frustrating.
Well, I don't see any way that this path, continuing on it, leads to anything other than economic collapse. Because, okay, you mentioned Trudeau's grown the federal workforce by 40%, but the cost of bureaucracy has grown by 70%.
Yes.
To the point where it's now $69.5 billion annually that the taxpayers are paying to employ the federal bureaucrats. So just between salaries for bureaucrats and the cost of following the rules that those bureaucrats put on businesses, you're actually looking at nearly $90 billion.
Yeah. So like you said, if it continues down this path, we have economic collapse, or you have just a few large corporations that run the entire country. And it was interesting getting an inside look at this and how the US was trying to handle the new AI boom, which is a whole interesting topic that I don't think we're getting into today. But they're like, anytime there's an industry that they want to control, they give a few companies the power to basically run the industry. Everyone else below them is basically just fighting for crumbs. There's nothing else there. And then they just control those few corporations. So they basically by proxy control the industry. This is just more and more government control. This is becoming more and more like China. They're just calling it something else. But that's exactly, so just to be clear, because people think that's always hyperbolic, that's exactly what it is, right? They have Chinese government involved in every major corporation there, and they play it like a game of chess. So the same thing appears to be happening here, where they just have there's government intervention. They only allow a few players at the table, and they basically have someone sitting at that table so they can control what's going on to some degree. They do something like this, or they continue down this path, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. So yes, small business dies. Yes, the streets look different. I don't know what kind of culture or community we have left, but I guess we figure that out. But in the background, the government's actually in more and more control of everything that's going on. They're just deeper and deeper entrenched. They're more deeply entrenched in our entire lives, our economy, and the entire country. They're essentially creating China. And I don't say that much because people always say it and it sounds like nonsense. But in this perspective, that's the direction we're going.
Well, just look at who's running the country and look at his admiration of China's basic dictatorship. And then,
good call.
I've mentioned before too, the historical family roots with the Trudeaus and their admiration of China, and Pierre essentially indoctrinating his kids into looking at China as the model of the future. And so I don't think it's hyperbolic at all to say that, there's been nothing to show us that that's not exactly where Trudeau would want things to go. And I want to bolster one thing you were saying there a lot, which is that when these, essentially what you can think of these as is they're called like command economies, when a government runs the economy, or state capitalism is what the communists would have called it. But the way it's a win-win for the mega businesses and the government, because the mega businesses go, yeah, okay, we're going to have the government up our ass and puppeting us essentially through regulation and overbearing regulation. But that regulation will cut out any competition from existing. And so we'll be able to monopolize the market.
Yes.
And then it's a win on them because they get to monopolize the market. You could think about this, a good representation of this in Canada would be our telecommunications, Bell and Rogers, and how, our prices we pay for, say, cell phone bills and stuff are astronomical compared to the rest of the world because of that relationship. But then it's a win on the government's end as well, because they go, well, now we have control of these industries, and we can actually leverage exactly what we want to happen into these industries, because we only have to deal with 2 or 3 major firms rather than having 100,000 small businesses that we have to worry about within the industry.
Yeah, basically you end up with a corporate political oligarchy. That's what the country's, and that's where we're headed right now. And the thing is, we've been on the fast track to that path for probably decades, us not seeing it. But we really, really increased our speed towards that destination in the last 5 years. And shit like this, like you see this, I don't understand how we can't demand more from these people. Or, maybe this is just one more thing that Canadians have to see to go, yeah, we just can't vote Liberals in. And one more thing that we can now hold the Conservatives accountable for. You got to reduce this by $20 billion, not 17.9, 20 billion. You got to do that. That's your goal. So it's interesting. Like, it is frustrating, but the more these things come to light, the more informed Canadians are, and the more we can actually continue to demand from our politicians. So the better, theoretically, the country should become, providing we can break through the mainstream media, which is also completely captured by or nationalized by our Canadian government.
Yeah, the last thing that I thought we should maybe highlight before moving on here is, you said it. Why would anybody in Canada want to start a business here right now? Well, that the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, the one that did that whole report, also found that 68% of entrepreneurs in Canada said they would not recommend entrepreneurship to the next generation.
Yeah, the other 32 just started and don't know what's going on.
Yeah. That's a very scary thing, because again, if you think about how this goes on the path, okay, you've got a government that is becoming more expensive to run. And again, the government never makes its own money. It only survives through taxation, aka seizing funds from productive entities. And so if you have less and less productive entities, less and less entrepreneurs creating revenue to tax, then everything just goes to shit. Hey everyone, we hope you're enjoying this episode. If so, please consider leaving us a kind review wherever you're listening. If even just a quarter of our weekly audience did so, we'd instantly become one of the top-rated Canadian podcasts. We appreciate you helping us out, and now back to the show. All right, moving on to our next topic, we've got Poilievre calls to deport temporary residents involved in violence or hate crimes. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has called for the deportation of temporary residents involved in violent or hate crimes, citing a sharp rise in anti-Semitic incidents. At a Holocaust memorial event in Ottawa, he noted that anti-Semitic hate has surged over 100% before October 7th and 251% after Hamas's attack on Israel. Jewish Canadians, despite being less than 1% of the population, faced 70% of religiously motivated hate crimes in 2023. Poilievre criticized Liberal inaction on the IRGC and government funding for individuals with histories of hate speech, aligning his stance with Trump's U.S. policy on deporting extremist non-citizens. So has the Overton window on deportation shifted?
100% it has. This is basically all due to Trump, because he just put his money where his mouth was. Mm-hmm. He's arrested and deported like 5,000 illegal immigrants already, and he's not going to stop. He's locked up his borders. He's created tariff wars over weak borders. So it's interesting actually to see this, because I think what you're gonna notice with Trump's, not just his rhetoric, but his actions at this point, because he seems to be a guy that's got nothing to lose right now. This is going to leak into other Western cultures pretty quickly, right? So not only are you saying, I actually agree with Poilievre too, 100%. Like, get rid of anybody that's doing shit like this, violent or hate crimes. that are temporary residents or illegal immigrants for some reason, get rid of them. What are we talking about? If there's an option to get rid of these people and they can go back to their other country, yeah, perfect. They're criminals. We don't want them here. It's enough nonsense. Like, what the fuck are we talking about? So this is just, for me in general, good policy. Anybody that's going, well, Jewish this and Jewish that, they're under a lot of fire these days. So I want to say, look, this isn't about picking a side of Israel or Palestine. That's not what this is about. If it's a hate crime at anybody, I don't agree with it. It's 100% wrong. Don't give people shit here. That doesn't make any sense. If they're in a war and you're in a war, fight them. If they're here in Canada, don't bring your war here. Don't do this. This is nonsense. You want to protest? Do your thing. Don't do this. Don't do this nonsense. Yeah, you should get the hell out of the country. But what I was going to say, sorry, with the Overton window shifting is there's actually a Liberal leader that just came out too. She said that she would be deporting all illegal immigrants from Canada. So when you got a Liberal saying something like that too, and you're talking about the Overton window, yes, it's definitely getting wider on this issue. But I think that's important because we should be unified in this. We need to close our borders down. Even if it were just to fix the relationship with the US, but really it's because our own cost of living and our own infrastructure is falling apart because of it. So yes, it is, and it's a good thing to see.
Yeah, it seemed like Poilievre was framing this around the, like he was saying this at a Holocaust memorial. So it did seem like he was framing it around the whole Israel and Palestine thing. But I say equality in this realm. Let's loop in the whole Khalistan stuff as well. Like
yes.
When Khalistanis go to a Hindu temple in Brampton and start causing shit, then
see ya.
Gone.
Bye.
Same thing with the Hindus running around in retaliation with machetes downtown Brampton afterwards. Bye.
See ya.
Like, I'm sorry, if you're a temporary resident, if you don't have citizenship to Canada, yeah, I don't see why that would even be at all contentious.
No,
like
agreed.
If I was
nonsense,
and I would hold the exact same standard. I don't care whether it's a Western country, whether it was, say, I went to Dubai or Russia or China or any of these other nations. If I went there and I was on a temporary visitor visa or student visa or something, and I was caught stealing or assaulting somebody or carrying out a religious hate crime or whatever, I wouldn't expect them to be like, oh, well, immigration's great. He's got to stick around.
If you did that shit in Russia, Dubai, or China, you'd either get your hand cut off or your head cut off. You would never see the light of day again, pal.
Yeah.
Wow.
But just to show how much the Overton window is shifting here in regards to deportations is we've now got Dr. Phil going on deportation runs, which is, can you just
he's been at this for a minute. Yo, your boy changed gears. He's in a new chapter and I'm here for it.
Can you imagine getting sent home and everybody's being like, oh, like who sent, like, why are you back here? Be like, Dr. Phil
got me.
What's your name?
Seda.
Seda what? Do you have a personal last name?
Sam.
Seda Sam?
Yes.
Where you from?
Where I was born or where I'm from?
Where you born?
Thailand.
You been deported before from the United States?
No.
Never been deported?
But I've been in the system before.
B&B.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What have you been charged with
Shots fired.
before?
I'm not gonna say nothing. I'm gonna talk to my lawyer.
Yeah. Are you a citizen?
My mom's a citizen.
Your mother's a citizen?
Yes.
But you're not?
Nope.
But you've never been deported before?
We Dr. Phil. We look like Dr. Phil.
Yeah? How do you know me?
No, I seen Dr. Phil, on TV.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is an example of sanctuary cities, right? We got an illegal alien convicted of sex crimes involving children, and he's walking the streets of Chicago. Again, the downfall, the problem with the sanctuary city, that people like us walking the street rather than law enforcement working with federal agents. This is what we're dealing with. Yeah. You've been charged with sex crimes with children?
Not really.
Not really? And never been deported?
Nope.
Huh. Let's take them in process and lock them up.
And look, I am pro-immigration. That's how Canada became what it is. And I think there's a lot of benefits to it, especially when you look at an aging population. But do it the right way. You do it a way that our infrastructure can manage, of course. And illegal immigration, there just has to be a zero tolerance policy for this. It's nonsense.
All right. Next story we've got Alberta Task Force slams COVID-19 response, urges vaccine halt and system overhaul. The Alberta COVID-19 pandemic response report, commissioned by Premier Danielle Smith, sharply criticizes the province's pandemic measures, citing failures in health communication, vaccine policy, and lockdown effectiveness. It questions vaccine necessity for low-risk groups, highlights adverse effects, and rejects claims that vaccine immunity surpasses natural immunity. Mask mandates are deemed ineffective outside healthcare settings, and lockdowns are criticized for causing economic and social harm without reducing transmission. The report accuses Alberta's regulatory bodies of suppressing scientific debate and calls for reforms prioritizing transparency, informed consent, and individual freedoms. Smith's leadership is being praised for addressing past failures openly. So is this a step towards accountability, or will this be a classic case of the government admitting wrongdoing and then taking no action to change anything?
Yeah, that's a tough question because I think you have to consider where the accountability would take place and what this might look like for the future. So will anybody fall on the sword? No, it's not how it's going to work. We already know politicians aren't really responsible for the things they do anyway. But, I do think that Alberta is going to change the way they do things dramatically. I think they will. And I think more people, more provinces. What's interesting that's happening right now is in my lifetime, from what I remember, you didn't really see the provinces, like the premiers, sort of forming their own groups and then not agreeing with the prime minister. It's kind of like everybody sort of fell in line. Now, again, I'm not that old and I haven't paid attention to politics this deeply, so someone may correct me. But what I'm noticing right now is that a lot more premiers are starting to rally behind Smith like a bit of a pseudo leader for that group. You know what I mean? I recognize that there are different factions and not everybody agrees with her. But I am seeing more and more people being like, hey, she's got things figured out here. She's actually doing what Canadians want. Like, I would not be surprised if she ends up being the prime minister in the next 10 years. I think she'd do a great job. And it's things like this that I know people are upset about it online because I did that video. Like they don't want to be in denial because they've taken several vaccines or they had the wool pull over their eyes, whatever it is. But it's things like this that Canadians actually want to see, and they want to see some accountability or just an admission of understanding of the situation. It's not even like they have to, like, for people that were vaccinated, it's not like they're going to pull it out of your arm. It's already done. Lockdowns are done. Masks, it's done. It's already happened. So you can't change history, but it's nice to know that they're like, hey, a government organization recognized, wow, we really, really got things wrong. Because usually what you see is politicians just say, oh, we just need to do more of it. We need more money and we're going to double down. We need to look at Hoax report. We just need more censorship for misinformation. Get the fuck out of here. What she's doing in this particular case, I think is really, really positive. I think it'll create a lot of accountability within Alberta. And I think she's setting a really strong precedent for other provinces in the country to maybe do some of the same or follow suit. You may see the conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, if he gets in, in October, he may start leaning towards some of the things she's doing as well. So it may motivate or it may push the Conservative Party to kind of follow some of these policies or do some of these things because they are important and to create more accountability at scale. In terms of the Liberals taking an accountability, zero chance, zero. But I do think, within pockets, I have hope for Canada. Like, if there's another lockdown or another pandemic, and I'm staying in this country, I know exactly the province I'm moving to.
To give the other side of the argument, a Alberta physician listed on the provincial COVID report says he disagrees with the finding and demands his name to be removed. And so the pro-vaccine crowd has definitely been leaning on this a lot and saying that this debunks the whole report. And it's so insane to me that, okay, that report said pretty much that, yes, vaccines weren't better than natural immunity. Masks mandates were ineffective. Lockdowns weren't beneficial. And what was...
well, they said to stop taking vaccines for kids, anybody that's
for
not
COVID.
At high risk. For COVID, yes, for COVID, correct. No kids, teenagers, anybody like that's low risk. They basically said cut it. Mask mandates should be... they should be an option. They should not be government enforced. But the thing is, what you were saying is they made a report pushing back against all the government measures, but they did it because they have objective information. We see what's happened from all these things. So you can fight it all you want, but it's objectively correct.
Right. And that was my point is, so you've got this guy who is now saying, I'm a big promoter of vaccines. This report is anti-science and anti-evidence. It advances misinformation. It speaks against the broadest and most diligent international scientific collaboration and census in history. This report sows distrust. It criticizes proven preventative public health measures while advancing fringe approaches. All of this now is common sense, what this report just broke out. Right. So I think we covered this a little while back, but that doctor who was running the drive-through vaccination clinic making hundreds of thousands of dollars because she had to repay, $600,000?
Just over $600,000 because she had 2 pop-up vaccination clinics that she was running with volunteer workers. So there was 2 rules. They had to be direct employees and it had to be at your facility. So she broke both of those rules and had to pay back over $600,000. Who knows what she got to keep though?
Right. And so you factor that into what this doctor is saying about this report and the vaccines and stuff, and saying how it's dangerous to not want to continue with COVID-19 vaccinations, especially in not low risk groups, right? Well, of course, you have a massive incentive to have that opinion. And I think this is one of the main issues that we saw through COVID, was that scientific consensus was built upon financial incentives.
So to clear something up for people, doctors get paid per vaccination that they give people, children, whoever it is. Now, there's an average price paid for the childhood vaccines. I don't want to say the numbers because I don't want to get them wrong. But what I do know is this: what doctors were getting for the COVID vaccines was more than double the average of what you get for a childhood vaccine, more than double what you'd get for a flu vaccine. So the incentive was incredibly strong.
And then too, any of these doctors that were part of this consensus of, this supposed worldwide consensus, the biggest consensus in human history, as he said, of course you would have no incentive to look back and say, yeah, hey, everything I did and said for that throughout that pandemic period was wrong.
Yeah, this guy's a wiener. That's all. He's just.
But this actually leads us into our last topic for the day, which is the ivory tower has fallen: fraud, politics, and the death of academic integrity. Academia is plagued by fraud, self-interest, and institutional decay, with scandals exposing systemic corruption. In 2022, Retraction Watch reported 13,000 academic papers were retracted for fraud or errors, though experts estimate this is only 10% of the problem. China leads in academic fraud, with 85% of 9,600 retracted papers from a single publisher involving Chinese co-authors. Even Chinese researchers admit to bribery, falsification, and manipulation to meet Chinese Communist Party imposed targets. North American universities also protect fraudulent researchers to preserve reputations. The COVID pandemic highlighted the dangers of corrupted science, with flawed policies justified as settled science. As trust in academia crumbles, urgent reform is needed to restore integrity and protect scientific progress. So, what are the societal ramifications of corrupted academia?
This goes so deep,
right?
Because we use, call it academic integrity across every sector of the market, right? For literally everything that we apply, there's usually some sort of scientific paper to support, whether it's medicine, whether it's tech growth, but really it doesn't matter. In a lot of spaces, this is what we depend on. We depend on it for exercise, or what's good for you, what diets are bad for you, all these other things. It's things that severely impact your life. So I think the reality here is you just can't trust anybody, which is so hard to do because the world is filled with so much information you don't even know where to look. I've been on a health and fitness journey my whole life. I've always taken reasonably good care of my body. I've always pushed the limits of my body, probably too far in many cases. And what I found, or what I talk to people about, as I say, there's a lot of ways to train. I think the focus as you get older is just to make sure you keep training. You want to, just because movement is medicine, you find out what works best for you and do that. And when it comes to diet, there's a lot of schools of thought. If there's a person that's got the diet for you, tell them to fuck off. There are several ways for your body to eat. Pretty much most people, we all need protein. It's pretty common. And I'm not trying to give anybody a lesson here. I'm just trying to say how I perceive things now because of all this nonsense. And your body either operates better with a higher fat or a higher carb diet. Stay away from refined sugars. It's all pretty simple shit. But my point is, try these things out for yourself, and then you see what works, as long as it's not dangerous. Because everybody's body's a little different. You have to try it on to see if it fits. That is a lot of health and fitness stuff. So that this formula works when it comes to working out or eating food or buying food at the grocery store. This is an effective model. The problem with this, though, is this goes so much deeper into medications we're taking and all these other things that we're doing. There's so many reports you read on, like literally COVID, for Christ's sake. Look what it did to the entire world. You can't take the same formula I just gave you and apply it to everything. I think the best model is to try that in many cases, as long as you're not doing something dangerous. I think you pretty much have to do more research. I think you got to see what's going to work for you and what's not, because these things are completely compromised. And I think it's funny, they say restore integrity. You can't. If this is the case, then you can't restore it. It needs to fall, and we need a parallel economy for academic integrity. I don't even know what that looks like. I'm almost flustered. I'm so annoyed with this. Like, I'm thinking about the ramifications, and my mind is just kind of spinning because it's like literally everything.
Yeah. So back in around 2008 was when the replication crisis came about, which was that they realized 50% of studies weren't able to be replicated.
Yes.
And so you look at that and you go, oh shit, if 50% of all of our supposed higher knowledge is bullshit, then yeah, how are we supposed to carry on? Where do we go from here?
The corruption within academia is only the first step.
Right.
Because then you got massive corruption and you've got a lot of bad actors inside big pharma. And now you got to consider the regulatory agencies as well in the middle.
Right.
They're all making significant mistakes that we already know of. Like that 2006 study on the beta amyloid plaques for Alzheimer's. The guy faked the entire study. It was all bullshit. So for 20 years, almost 20, I think it was in 2022 when they kind of started pulling the wool back on that. Or pardon me. I think it was about 2022 when they started pulling the curtain back on that. But just call it 20 years from today, people were using bad academic studies to give people treatment for something, and the failure rate was in the high 90s, 99 point something. So the real world ramifications of this is hundreds of thousands of people have died since then. You know what I mean? You think about it, you're like, well, 50% of studies can't be replicated. I think we need to start putting less weight on the organizations that we are putting them on. Again, I really go back to this, like, we need to find a way to create some sort of parallel economy here. And I say the word economy, maybe parallel system's a better word, sorry, where we start testing ideas, that are already tested. Like, okay, this is what this is. Well, you know what? Some other organization needs to figure this out to see if we can replicate this, because if half of them can't be, that's very significant. But then when you look at the daisy chain of events through, like you said, these people are like, well, we didn't want to, basically it was for ego. We were going to call it settled science because we either have to meet these targets or we have to worry about our reputation.
Right.
So
not even just reputation, but also just our job.
Yeah,
I lose my job if I don't.
It's insane. The incentive structure is all fucked up in there. The problem is the ramifications are very significant. And now it's also stupid shit. Like they're pulling out the red dye in the US. I don't want to go too deep down this conversation, but I was watching the RFK hearing today for a little bit, and he's like, hey, I've been saying these things cause cancer for the longest time. They've been telling me I'm a conspiracy theorist and a quack. Now they're pulling them out because they're like, hey, it does. That's correct. It's just, I don't know, man. It makes the institutions from the top down, not just government, but all of the institutions harder to not only trust, but want to be a part of. Why would I want to send my kid to a school like this?
Just to really drive this point home about how absurd academia has become is detailing out some of the papers that James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, and Helen Pluckrose hoaxed the academic world with in 2017 and 2018. So essentially their idea was, let's create the most insane studies, like just fabricate them and see if we can get them published in papers to show that this whole system is just bullshit. So one of the papers that they got published was Fat Bodybuilding. Fat Studies published a paper. They argued that bodybuilding should be considered a fat inclusive activity. And they were like, yeah, that's a scientific paper, published it. Another one was they wrote a paper about how dog behavior in dog parks could demonstrate RAPE culture and called for political action. So they were saying that dogs humping each other in dog parks was helping contribute to RAPE culture in the real world.
And that got published.
And that got published. Another one was on how restaurants affect society. So things like Hooters, Twin Peaks, and Tilted Kilt sports bars has sociological impacts. Another one was the conceptual penis as a social construct.
What?
This one got accepted, but the hoax was found out before that they actually published, but they did accept it. And the paper claimed that the penis is not an anatomical reality, but a social construct that perpetuates toxic masculinity. Another one was rubbing one out, and it was proposed that men masturbating while thinking about women is a form of sexual violence.
That got published?
It got accepted, but so it got accepted, and then the hoax came out that they were trolling.
See, this is another problem that I want to add to this is we are letting science become political science. We're letting it become cultural science. So we're actually shifting objectivity to subjectivity using culture as the filter. That makes this even more dangerous.
Right.
It's like when you hear something or read something or listen to something, whether it's me, whether it's you, whether it's anybody saying anything, we just have to do a little more research and be a little more diligent. And I think what's kind of frustrating is going through that whole COVID period where you were vilified or you were made into a pariah for doing your own research, right? But now this kind of information comes out. You have no other choice.
Right.
If you want to take care of yourself, your family, and the people around you, that is the only way.
And that's why I think you need to have a certain level of flexibility. This whole concept of settled science is bullshit.
No,
it's
the whole idea.
No. We constantly need to be refining. And I think to your point, don't take anything we say as like unfiltered truth. Just like, oh, these guys get it right all the time. Like, we've been wrong.
I'm an idiot.
The difference is that you have to be willing to update the mental model as you go.
Yes, I think like you said, you have to be in addition to what I was saying, you have to be very fluid and consider all these other perspectives. And I think that's how you do get to the bottom of these things. And my suggestion is anytime anything novel comes out, it's this is how I do this with cars too. Anytime a new model of car comes out, I never buy the first one. You wait, give it a couple of years. Like when they change their generations.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like my dad bought an 07 Jeep. That's when they changed the model. Absolute lemon. They fixed it. Now they're much better. But it's like when that's kind of my perception of a lot of these things. It's like, hey, this is brand new. I'm going to see how that plays out. I'm good. And it's shit like this that really sort of reaffirms that stance.
Yeah. I think curiosity over convictions. That's the mode. All right. Before we get out of here, don't forget to head over to our Substack where you can sign up for our newsletter, which goes out 5 days a week, completely free. You can find the link in the description below, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.